He was almost out, just 6 months to go. But in a single visit, everything unraveled. The woman who loved him walked into that prison and left it covered in blood. What she discovered inside those walls, who he was sleeping with, pushed her over the edge. A secret affair. A warden. A lie that turned deadly. This is the story of the visiting room murder. Subscribe to Dark Motives and tell us, where are you watching from? Martin Ellis was serving a 9-year sentence at Ridgeway Correctional Facility in Missouri. Armed robbery. No one was hurt, but it was enough to cost him nearly a decade of his life. He wasn't what you'd expect from a convicted felon. Clean-cut, calm, even charming. And inside those walls, he played by the rules. He didn't fight, didn't get into trouble. If anything, he blended in. On the outside, his wife Vanessa stood by him. For nearly 8 years, she drove 4 hours every month to see him. Brought their daughter when she could. Wrote letters. Took his calls. She believed in second chances, and she believed in Martin. But there were whispers, rumors from the inside, that Martin wasn't just staying quiet to do his time, that he was cost-protected, and protection in prison doesn't come free. Vanessa met Martin when they were just teenagers. She was 16, he was 18. He had that magnetic charm, the kind that made you feel like you were the only one in the room. They were inseparable. By 21, they were married. By 23, they had their daughter, Layla. But Martin always chased shortcuts, fast money, risky moves, and eventually, the wrong crowd. Vanessa begged him to stop. She worked 2 jobs to keep the house afloat. But Martin always said, just one more hustle. That last hustle ended with flashing lights and a prison sentence. Still, she stayed, even when friends told her to move on, even when Layla stopped asking about her dad. She believed in the man he used to be, and hoped prison would force him to change. For years, nothing seemed off, until the visits became different. Martin grew distant, jumpy. His calls got shorter. And when she asked if he was okay, he'd say, "Don't worry about me. Just keep coming." She didn't know it then. But something inside that prison had changed him. It was a chilly March afternoon when Vanessa made the drive to Ridgeway, the last visit she would ever make. The second she stepped into the waiting room, she felt it. A strange tension. Guards whispering. An officer glanced at her, then looked away. When Martin finally walked in, he looked nervous. He sat down, kissed her cheek, but wouldn't hold her gaze. "What's going on?" she asked. He shook his head. "Nothing. Just tired." But she knew that look. She'd known it since high school. Martin was hiding something. Over the next 10 minutes, she watched him fidget, glance around, barely speak. She tried to laugh, tried to lighten the mood, and then she saw her, a woman in a tan suit, mid-40s, confident, attractive, walking past the visiting room glass with her clipboard, but not before casting a glance, a long, knowing glance. Vanessa caught it. Martin looked down, and in that exact moment, everything in her shifted. "Who is she?" she asked. Martin hesitated, then smiled weakly. "That's Warden Brooks." But Vanessa had already seen the truth, not in the woman's eyes, in Martin's reaction. That wasn't just a warden. That was his woman. Vanessa didn't say a word for the rest of the visit. Her hands were clenched beneath the table, her throat dry. Martin tried to change the subject, asked about Layla, about the weather, but she barely responded. When the buzzer signaled the end of the visit, she stood up without a hug. She looked him dead in the eyes and said, "How long?" Martin's face tightened. He didn't answer. She whispered it again. "How long has she been sleeping with you?" A nearby guard stiffened. Martin leaned in and said quietly, "Vanessa, don't do this here." But it was already done. She walked out of Ridgeway with fire in her chest, and something else building beneath the surface. That night, she didn't sleep. She scrolled through prison forums, Reddit threads, whistleblower posts, And what she found chilled her. Inmates at Ridgeway had long whispered about Warden Renee Brooks, rumors of private deals, inmate favoritism, and one name that kept popping up, Martin Ellis. A few even claimed they'd seen them together, in offices, after hours. One former guard, anonymously, had even written, "She's been sleeping with that inmate for years. Everyone knows it. They just won't touch her." That's when Vanessa snapped. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the humiliation. She had spent 8 years fighting for a man who was being kept safe, in bed with the woman in charge. She decided she needed closure. She needed one more visit. Vanessa called the prison the next morning, told them she needed to reschedule a visit. They booked her for Friday, 2 days away. She didn't tell anyone, not her sister, not her daughter. But she did make one stop, a small pawn shop just off Highway 61. She walked in, calm as ever, and asked to see their protection items. An hour later, she had what she needed, a small, sharp folding blade, the kind you could hide in a bra strap. Friday came fast. She dressed simply, jeans, hoodie, no makeup, just focus. When she arrived at Ridgeway, the usual guards barely glanced at her. One even smiled. "Third visit this month. Must be love." She smiled back, but inside, she was already somewhere else. They patted her down. Metal detector beeped once, but she blamed a belt buckle. No questions. She walked through. The visiting room was quiet. Only 2 other families there. Martin was brought in 5 minutes later. He looked nervous, like he'd been warned. "You shouldn't have come," he said. Vanessa sat down across from him, resting her hands on the table. Calm. "I needed to see your face one last time." He looked confused. "What are you talking about?" She leaned forward, lowered her voice. "I gave you everything. My life, my time, my daughter's childhood, and you gave it all to her." Martin's eyes darted to the guard at the door. "Vanessa, you don't understand." She cut him off. "No, you don't understand. You were supposed to come home to me. Not her, me." Her hand dropped beneath the table, and by the time Martin realized what was happening, it was too late. It happened fast, but not fast enough to miss. In one clean motion, Vanessa lunged across the table. Her right hand whipped up from under the surface, gripping the small folding blade, and she stabbed Martin's once, straight into his neck. The sound that followed wasn't a scream, it was a gasp. A wet, choking gasp as he fell backward off the plastic chair. Blood sprayed across the table, across her shirt, across the tiled floor. The guard closest to them froze for half a second, just long enough for Vanessa to whisper, "That was for every lie you told while I waited for you." Chaos exploded. Guards rushed in. The other families screamed. A child cried out. Vanessa didn't run. She stood perfectly still, arms raised, hands stained red. As they slammed her to the ground and handcuffed her, her voice was calm, steady. "You should search her office," she said. "There's more filth in there than in the cells." Inmates were cleared, visiting hours suspended. Martin Ellis was pronounced dead at 12:36 p.m., less than 3 minutes after the blade hit his artery. The warden, Renee Brooks, was pulled from her office by internal investigators before sundown, and the truth was just starting to unravel. Within 24 hours, Ridgeway Correctional Facility was under full lockdown. News trucks lined the outer gates, helicopters hovered, and behind those walls, the real damage was just beginning. Warden Renee Brooks was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But the whispers were already turning into headlines. Multiple inmates came forward, anonymously, confirming the affair. They described late-night visits, private meetings, special treatment. One even claimed he'd seen Martin Ellis leave her office zipping up his uniform. Guards admitted they'd noticed, but were afraid to speak. Renee had connections, deep ones, but with Martin dead, the silence cracked. A full audit of her office uncovered hidden letters. Some were love notes, handwritten by Martin. Others were threats, Vanessa wasn't wrong. The affair wasn't just real, it was dangerous. The Department of Corrections launched an emergency task force, and the case, once dismissed as an act of jealousy, was now exposing a systemic abuse of power. But still, one question echoed louder than the rest. Why did she really kill him? Was it rage, or was it revenge for something darker? During her interrogation, Vanessa didn't cry. She sat at the table, hands cuffed, blood still drying on her sleeves, and answered every question with calm clarity. "I didn't go there to kill him," she said. "I went to confront him, to get the truth." But detectives weren't convinced. Why bring a knife? Why go silent for 2 days? Why time it just before his parole hearing? That's when Vanessa said something that changed the entire tone of the room. "You don't know what she did to him." When pressed, she explained, Martin hadn't seduced the warden. He'd been used, groomed. At first it was privileges, better meals, more rec time, early job assignments. Then came the visits, the isolation, the manipulation. According to Vanessa, Martin told her, during one of their calls months before, that he owed the warden too much, that she could end him at any moment. Vanessa believed he was being coerced, not in love, but trapped. She said, "He didn't cheat. He was being kept, like a pet, and when I confronted him, he broke. He knew he'd never leave that prison." But the investigators still had doubts. Was that guilt talking? Or had Vanessa uncovered a truth no one wanted to hear? One thing was clear. This wasn't just a crime of passion. It was a final act of desperation. Vanessa's trial began 6 months later. By then, she had become a viral sensation, not just for the murder, but for why she did it. Some saw her as unhinged, a woman scorned who snapped in the most brutal way. Others, they called her brave. In court, the prosecution painted her as cold and calculated. She brought a weapon. She planned this. This was murder, not a moment of passion. But the defense dug deep. They brought in expert witnesses on psychological trauma, betrayal-induced psychosis, and systemic abuse within correctional facilities. They argued that Vanessa's mental state had deteriorated after years of emotional erosion, worsened by discovering that the man she sacrificed everything for had been taken from her in the most humiliating way possible. Then came the biggest twist. A whistleblower from Ridgeway took the stand. A former corrections officer, and under oath, he confirmed it all. The warden had a private relationship with Martin. She arranged solo job shifts for him, gave him access to staff areas. He even claimed to have seen them embracing, more than once and behind locked doors. That testimony cracked the case wide open. The judge ruled out premeditated murder. Instead, Vanessa was convicted of manslaughter in the 2nd degree. Sentence: 7 years, with possibility of parole in 4. The courtroom was silent. Vanessa didn't smile. She just whispered, "At least now, I can sleep." Vanessa was transferred to a women's correctional facility 2 hours away from Ridgeway. In her first interview behind bars, she said, "I didn't want to be a killer. I just wanted the truth." But truth doesn't come cheap. Renee Brooks was quietly forced to resign. She was never charged. Despite multiple investigations and damning testimonies, no formal criminal case was ever brought against her. When asked about Martin, she gave one statement. "He was a complicated inmate. I had no improper relationship with him." But the letters said otherwise. Layla, Martin and Vanessa's daughter, is now 19. She hasn't visited her mother. In a brief TikTok post, she wrote, "Both my parents are gone, one to prison, one to the grave. All because of secrets. The visiting room was remodeled. New glass, new tables, new rules. But every now and then, a new inmate will point to that far corner, the one with the faint mark on the floor, and say, 'That's where it happened.' A murder that wasn't just about betrayal. It was about power, love, control, and the breaking point of a woman who gave everything and lost herself in the waiting." Thank you for watching Dark Motives. Don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. And remember, behind every headline is a darker story.